So, here's the situation. Guy's girlfriend vanishes for an entire evening. No call, no text, zero heads up. He waits. Tries to reach her. Nothing. Then at 9:00 p.m., he finally gets a message. 15 words. I'm not your property. Stop calling me. No argument leading up to it. No explanation, just that. And instead of blowing up her phone or showing up wherever she was to demand answers, he replied with 2 sentences. Changed the locks and went completely silent. What happened over the next 72 hours is one of those stories where you watch someone finally stop carrying a weight they forgot they were allowed to put down. Let's get into it. My girlfriend texted, "I'm not yours. Stop calling." I said, "Got it. I'm not your boyfriend either. Don't come back." Locks switched. Silence. Hours later came the tearful calls. "My name is Cole. I'm 31 and up until about a week ago, I had a girlfriend named Nina. 3 years together. The last year of that living together in my apartment. Lease in my name. Rent in my name. Utilities in my name. Nina contributed when she could, which I came to understand meant almost never when something due was actually due, but somehow always when she wanted something. I made excuses for it over and over, because that's the kind of thing you do when you've told yourself the relationship is worth the ongoing friction. And here's the thing. There was a version of Nina that was genuinely good to be around. We didn't fall into this overnight. Early on, she was thoughtful, present, interested in things. That version of her is why I stayed as long as I did, because every time something felt off, I'd compare it to who she was at the start and decide the math still worked out. I kept finding reasons to look past things that, taken together, told a pretty clear story about where this was actually headed. The money was one thing, the communication was another. She had this habit of going completely cold without warning, not because anything specific had happened, just as a matter of mood or preference, and then coming back like the gap hadn't occurred. No explanation, no acknowledgement, and somehow it always became my job to figure out what I'd done wrong in the silence. I'd ask if everything was okay and get some version of "you're overthinking it," or "why do you always make everything a big deal?" So, I learned to not ask, which makes your life quieter, but doesn't actually fix anything. It just teaches you to swallow things that deserve to be said out loud. The weird part is, you don't notice how much you've adjusted. You don't sit down one day and decide to stop advocating for yourself. It happens in small steps over a long time. You stop bringing something up because last time it became a whole thing. You stop mentioning a pattern because she's going to call it an attack. You stop checking in because apparently that's needy. And then one day, you look at your own life and realize you've been managing someone else's comfort at the expense of your own for so long that you've forgotten what it felt like to just say what's true without running it through a filter first. There's a specific kind of relationship where you're never quite allowed to have a clean reaction to anything. You say something bothered you and suddenly the conversation is about why you're sensitive. You try to talk about a pattern and it becomes about why you're always negative. You eventually stop bringing things up, not because they're resolved, but because the cost of bringing them up is higher than the cost of carrying them. That was us. And I don't say that to paint her as some kind of monster. I say it because it explains why what happened next surprised me, as much as it did, including my own reaction to it. I'm telling you all that because without it, the rest of this story sounds like I overreacted to a bad text. Last Tuesday, Nina didn't come home from work. No heads up, no running late message, nothing. I wasn't at the worried stage yet at 7 p.m., more confused than anything else. No argument I was aware of, no tension earlier in the day, nothing to signal that this evening was going to be different from any other. I called around 7:15, straight to voicemail, sent a quick, "Everything okay?" and waited. An hour went by. I tried again. Nothing. I want to be clear that I wasn't flooding her phone or losing my mind over it. 2 calls and 1 text over an hour, when someone who lives with you doesn't come home without a word, isn't controlling. It's being a person who gives a reason to be cared about. At 9:12 p.m., my phone buzzed. Her text said, "I'm not your property. Stop calling me." No context, no explanation, no lead-up, just that landing in my phone like it had been sitting in a draft folder for a while, and she'd finally just hit send. I stared at that message for a long time, not because I was confused about what it said. The words were clear enough. I stared at it because of how familiar the tone was. That particular flavor of contempt that positions you as the unreasonable one before you've even had a chance to respond. The kind that turns your own concern into the problem. I'd felt that tone before, more times than I'd been honest with myself about. Something shifted in me right then, quiet, not dramatic. Like a gear that had been grinding for a long time finally just slipped into a different position. I typed back, "Understood. I'm not your boyfriend anymore. Don't come home." Then I changed the locks. I want to address that before anyone comes in hot. The lease was in my name, and my name only. I paid every bill attached to that apartment. Nina was there as my partner, not as a legal tenant with standing in that space. The moment she sent that message, she made her position clear, and I chose to accept it exactly as stated. That's all the lock change was, taking her at her word. After I changed the locks, I put my phone face down on the kitchen counter and went quiet. No long follow-up message, no dramatic anything. Made dinner, watched some TV, went to bed early. 3 hours of complete silence on my end. I want to describe what that quiet felt like because it wasn't what I expected. I'd been in low-grade conflict mode for so long, that constant background hum of managing someone else's moods, tracking what you said and how you said it, anticipating the next cold front, that I'd forgotten what the absence of it felt like. Sitting there, making dinner, not checking my phone every 5 minutes, not wondering if I needed to apologize for something I didn't understand. It felt like the first full breath I'd taken in months. That's when I understood that some of what I'd been calling love was really just tension. I'd gotten so used to it that I'd stopped noticing it was there. Then the calls started. Missed call. Missed call. Voicemail. 2 more missed calls. By midnight, my phone looked like it had been through something. I didn't answer any of them. I could already map the arc without picking up. Anger first, then disbelief that this was still going, then the slow pivot to something softer when the harder approach stopped producing results. Nina didn't improvise much under pressure. She had a pattern, same as most people do when they're scared. Around 1:00 a.m., I heard pounding on the front door, controlled, not frantic, the kind of knock that still thinks it can win. She called my name, said to open up, said she didn't want to handle this in the hallway. I didn't move. She tried the knob a few times. Then I heard her heels hit the floor, kicked off. Then her voice came through the door differently, lower and tight. "You're being insane. We had a fight. Adults don't do this." We didn't have a fight. She sent a message. I accepted it. There's a difference. And the fact that she kept calling it a fight was its own kind of tell. A fight implies 2 people who disagree. What happened was one person making a declaration and another person deciding to honor it. She wanted to reframe it as something mutual, so she could demand a mutual resolution. I wasn't going to do that. The insults came next, controlling, insecure. She said this was exactly why she'd needed space from me. I leaned against the kitchen counter and noticed something I wasn't expecting. I felt calm. Not the kind you have to manufacture, the kind that shows up when you finally stop arguing with something you already know is true. Every word she said through that door was confirming something I'd been filing away for months without letting myself look at directly. The controlling accusation, the insecure one, I'd heard both before in smaller doses when I'd pushed back on anything. They were her default when other options ran out. Hearing them now in this context was clarifying in a way I hadn't expected. Around 1:18 a.m. the tone shifted. Her voice went softer. She said she didn't have her charger, that her things were in there. I watched my phone light up on the counter and vibrate itself still. Then at 1:34, I heard her slide down the door. That slow drag of fabric on wood hit differently than I expected, then quieter. "I didn't mean it like that. You know I didn't." That sentence, that exact sentence, had followed every line she'd ever crossed, every disappearing act, every dismissal, every time she'd made me feel like my reaction to something was the actual problem. Afterward, it was always that. "I didn't mean it like that," said just late enough to cool things down without changing anything. A reset button dressed up as an apology. For the first time, I didn't respond to it. I slept on the couch that night, not because I was too sad for the bedroom. It just felt like neutral ground I hadn't fully claimed yet. When I woke up the next morning, my phone showed 37 missed calls. I made coffee and listened to the voicemails standing at the kitchen counter. I didn't sit down for them. Sitting would have given them too much weight. The first two were rage. The next three were disbelief. The tone of someone who still thinks you're bluffing. By the sixth message, her voice had dropped a full level and slowed down. She said she didn't know where she was supposed to go, that I couldn't just lock her out like this. There was a version of me, not even very far back, who would have opened that door on the sixth voicemail. Who would have told himself that she was clearly scared, clearly hurting, clearly needed someone right now, and that being the person who shows up in that moment is what you do when you care about someone. That version would have convinced himself this was compassion. I know now it would have been the cycle. One more rotation of the same wheel, with the same guy absorbing the same cost, and both of them pretending it was something else. That one almost worked. Almost. Pause. This is me jumping in real quick, not Cole. I want to highlight something because it's easy to miss. I don't know where I'm supposed to go. She sent that text from somewhere, meaning she had a location. She had a plan. She had somewhere to land when she decided tonight was the night she wasn't coming home. She just didn't plan for him to let her stay there. That's not someone trapped. That's someone whose safety net got pulled without warning, and she cannot process it. Anyway, Cole opens the door on the chain. And this next part is where things get real interesting. At 8:46 a.m., there was a knock. Completely different energy. Polite, almost rehearsed. The version of Nina that shows up when she needs something and knows anger isn't going to get it. I opened the door on the chain. She looked rough. Makeup from the night before still on but smudged, hair thrown into a ponytail, wearing a hoodie of mine that I recognized. When she saw me, she straightened up fast. The soft approach lasted about 2 seconds before her jaw tightened. "So, you're really doing this?" she said. "You think you can just erase me overnight?" "I didn't erase you," I told her. "You drew the line," she scoffed. Said the text was about her needing boundaries, that I was twisting it into something it wasn't. I said it was about disrespect, nothing more complicated than that. Her eyes moved past me into the apartment. "I live here," she said. "You lived here," I corrected. "With me." She crossed her arms. Said what I was doing was a form of abuse. That word. She reached for it the way some people reach for their phone the second a conversation gets uncomfortable. Automatic without stopping to think about whether it actually applies. I told her calmly that I hadn't touched her, hadn't threatened her, hadn't shown up wherever she was to chase her down. I'd done exactly what she asked. She said that wasn't what she meant. I told her she'd wanted power without consequences. Her face went red. "You don't get to decide that," she said. I looked at her through the gap in the door and said, quiet and even, "I already did." She dropped the anger almost instantly. Her expression shifted, eyes going glassy. "I just needed one night without you calling me," she said softly. "I didn't think you'd do something so extreme." "That's the problem," I told her. "You never think I will." She stared at me, looking for something in my face. The version of me that could be talked down if she found the right pressure point. The one who would read her expression and decide her discomfort outweighed the situation. She didn't find him, and I watched the recognition move across her face that this was actually real. She tried a few more approaches after that, said I was throwing her out like she was nothing, said she'd only needed one night, as though I'd been the one to change the dynamic between us. I reminded her what she'd actually sent. Not, "I need some space tonight, but I'm not your property. Stop calling me." She rolled her eyes and said I was being too literal. I told her that was always the issue. It was always about what she meant, never about what she actually said. She leaned closer to the door and lowered her voice. "Open it. We'll talk inside. You're embarrassing yourself out here." Image management. Even now, even in this. I told her I wasn't opening the door, that we could arrange a time for her to get her things with someone else present. Her expression shifted completely. "So, this is punishment," she said, "because I didn't check in like a good girlfriend." "No," I said, "this is me listening." That landed weird. She stared. You don't get to just end things by text. You ended them by text, I replied. I just confirmed it. Her phone buzzed in her hand. She looked at the screen, then back at me. Where am I supposed to go? She asked, and for just a second, her voice dropped all the performance out of it. I don't know, I said honestly. But that stopped being my responsibility the moment you decided I wasn't allowed to care. Her mouth opened and then closed. There was real fear there, not grief about us. I could see the difference. Fear about logistics, about the gap between where she'd assumed she was standing and where she actually was. She spent another several minutes in that hallway trying to find an angle that would produce a different result. Everything from your being dramatic to this affects both of us, not just you, to lowering her voice again and trying to make it feel like we were just two adults who could handle this reasonably if I'd stopped being difficult. None of it worked because none of it was actually about fixing anything. She wasn't trying to repair something. She was trying to undo something. Those are two very different conversations, and they require two very different versions of the guy on the other side of the door. She was talking to the old version. He wasn't home anymore. You're going to regret this, she said finally. Maybe, I told her. But the regret I had staying finally outweighed the fear of leaving. That balance doesn't tip back. She left a few minutes after that. I watched through the peephole as she paced the parking lot with her phone to her ear, gesturing back toward the building. I didn't need to hear the words. By the way, she moved. I was already the controlling one, the unstable one, the guy who'd blown everything up over nothing. Hold on, this is me, not Cole. I need you to catch something. She told him he was being too literal for taking her exact words at face value. Too literal. That is the full playbook in 2 words. Send a message designed to sting, then call the reaction unreasonable. It only works on someone still scared of losing you. The second that fear is gone, the move has nothing to grip. Cole already did that math. Once you stop being afraid of losing something, the entire game board disappears. She's about to run a few more angles here. And honestly, the range on these is almost impressive. Around noon, the texts started coming in from other numbers. Her mom telling me what I was doing was probably illegal. Her friend Brooke saying I was proving exactly why Nina had needed space in the first place. I didn't reply to any of them, not because I was playing it cool, but because there was genuinely nothing to say. Any response I sent was going to get turned into ammunition or evidence of something. Silence was the only answer that couldn't be used against me. An hour later, Nina sent a completely different message. No accusations, no blame, nothing that hadn't already failed, just logistics. Said she was exhausted, hadn't slept, just needed to grab some clothes and her laptop. That one was carefully written. Reasonable on purpose, stripped down to only the practical. I replied with one sentence. We can arrange a time later with someone else present. Her typing bubble appeared, vanished, came back. Then, so, you don't trust me now? I stared at my phone. Trust wasn't the thing at stake here. Trust assumes both parties are operating in good faith. What we'd had was a pattern, a consistent repeating pattern over 3 years, and I'd finally decided to trust the pattern instead of the promises. I typed back, not promises. That was the last message I sent that afternoon. By mid-afternoon, she showed up again, this time with Brooke a few steps behind her, arms crossed, clearly drafted as backup, face arranged in the expression of someone who'd been given one side of the story and arrived ready to hold the line. Nina knocked softly, performing reasonableness, said through the door they could all just talk like adults. Brooke added that I was making this worse than it needed to be. I spoke loud enough to be heard clearly. I'm not escalating anything. I'm ending it, Nina's voice cracked. After everything I put up with from you. That sentence settled everything for me. Not with anger, just with clarity. She wasn't devastated about losing the relationship. She was upset about losing the apartment, the stability, the version of me that had always eventually backed down. Once I could see that clearly, there was no urgency left in any of it. Okay. Stop. After everything I've put up with from you, she disappeared for a full evening with 0 word. Sent, I'm not your property at 9 at night, showed up the next morning demanding entry. Then brought Brooke as backup when that didn't work, And she is the one who put up with things. That is a full gymnastics routine right there. I am genuinely in awe of the rotation. Captain Selective Memory sticks the landing every single time. But here's what matters. Cole doesn't even react to it. Doesn't argue. Doesn't take the bait. And that non-reaction is exactly what makes the next 24 hours go the way they do. Stay with it. That night was the quietest the apartment had been in over a year. No footsteps, no cabinet doors shut with a little too much force, no undercurrent of something unresolved hanging over every room. Just the refrigerator humming and my phone lighting up on the counter every 10 minutes, testing whether I'd changed my mind yet. I hadn't. I didn't answer a single call. At 9:42 p.m., she left a voicemail that made me actually sit down for a second. Her voice was shaking. She said she didn't understand how I could do this so coldly, that she loved me, that I didn't get to shut her out like she meant nothing. And here's the thing, that was the most honest thing she'd said through all of it. Not because it was really about love, because the way she said it, love and access had always been the same thing to her. Availability, compliance, me staying reachable no matter what she said or did. Cutting that off made me the cold one. That was the only version of the logic that ever got applied. I sat there running back through every time I'd been told I was too much for wanting basic communication, too needy for checking in when she'd gone quiet for hours, too insecure for expecting someone who lived with me to let me know she was okay. And now I was heartless for stopping. The framing only ran in one direction, and it only ever ran in a direction that cost me something. Around 11 p.m., there was a knock that was different from everything before it. Frantic. Cole, please. Her voice through the door, shaking. I'll say whatever you want. Just let me in. That stopped me. Not let's fix this. Not I want to talk it through. Say whatever you want. She'd stopped pretending the goal was repair. She needed the door to open, and she'd quit dressing that up in anything else. I'm not opening the door, I said. Long pause. Then anger broke through again, louder and less contained than before. Said I thought I was some kind of hero. I told her I just finally listened to her. She sobbed against the door, then really cried. And for a second, the old wiring in me tried to fire. The part that had always said her pain mattered more than mine, that her tears were more real than my discomfort. But I could see it clearly now. Opening that door wouldn't have been compassion. It would have been choosing the same cycle one more time. I hope you're safe tonight, I said. But we're done. The crying stopped almost immediately. That told me everything I still needed to know. Wait, this is me, not Cole. I need you to sit with that for 1 second. The crying stopped the moment the door became a closed option. Not gradually, not after a beat, almost instantly. Look, I'm not saying she felt nothing real through all of this. I'm sure there were genuine emotions underneath it somewhere, but that reflex, going from sobbing to silence the instant she registered it wasn't working, is not grief. That is a strategy hitting a wall and shutting off. Cole heard it. I think that's the moment this became genuinely simple for him. Tomorrow morning, she escalates to something almost creative. The next morning, I got an email. Nina hated email. Too permanent. Too easy to screenshot. Too much of a paper trail for someone who preferred to operate verbally where nothing could be verified afterward. But texts hadn't worked. Calls hadn't worked. Showing up twice with and without backup hadn't worked. So, she pivoted to reframing the entire situation as something reasonable in writing on the record. The email was long and clearly thought out. She said she felt unsafe, that she'd been blindsided, that she'd experienced something she called emotional abandonment. She used the word trauma twice. Then, toward the end, she noted she might have to involve someone if I continued being uncooperative. That last part made me angry. Not the loud kind, the focused kind, the clean anger that narrows everything down to what actually matters. I replied with 3 sentences. You told me to stop calling you. I did. You said you weren't my property. I agreed. We can coordinate pickup of your belongings through a third party. Nothing else. 10 minutes later, an unknown number called. I didn't pick up. Then another call. Then a text from her sister, someone I hadn't talked to in months, asking what was wrong with me. I blocked the number. By early afternoon, she showed up alone. No Brooke, no backup, just her standing in the hallway with red eyes and shaking hands. She asked for her laptop through the door, said she had work that needed to get done. That was the first request that didn't have any angle buried in it. Pure logistics, nothing attached. I told her to step back from the door, got the laptop, opened it just wide enough to slide it through. Our fingers didn't touch. She looked at me in a way she hadn't through any of this, like she was seeing something clearly for the first time. "You're really not coming back from this, are you?" she asked. I shook my head. "Neither are you." She started to say something, then stopped. Her shoulders dropped, not dramatically, just went slack. And that was the moment the argument actually ended. Not in some big confrontation, not in a final blow-up, a question and a head shake, and something between us quietly closed. The apartment didn't feel like mine yet after she left. It felt like everything in it was still waiting to hear I'd made a mistake. I spent that evening packing her things methodically, not dramatically. Clothes folded, shoes paired, toiletries sealed. 2 years in this apartment and there were entire drawers I hadn't opened in months because they were hers. Shelves I left alone because she had a specific arrangement she preferred. It was strange to realize going through it all how much of my own space I'd quietly carved myself out of without noticing. It just became the layout of my life. The shape of keeping the peace. There were small things that hit harder than I expected. A grocery list on the back of a receipt. Her handwriting listing stuff she liked. A mug she'd claimed as hers that had been mine originally. 2 throw pillows on the couch she'd specifically bought. I'd always thought they were more for show than comfort, but I'd kept my mouth shut. None of it was a big deal individually. The sum of it was something else. It was 3 years of small adjustments, small concessions, small spaces I'd quietly stopped inhabiting because she took them up and it was easier not to negotiate. I looked at that stack of boxes and thought about how much lighter the apartment was going to feel, and how weird it was that I hadn't realized how heavy it had gotten. Around 8:00 p.m., a text came from a new number, her again. Said she wasn't angry anymore, just wanted to understand how things had gotten to this point. An hour after that, a FaceTime request declined. Then the longest message she'd sent, paragraphs of apology woven with deflection. She was overwhelmed that night. I took things too literally. She never thought I would actually leave. That last line sat with me. She never thought I'd leave. I turned that over, sitting in the quiet of that apartment, her boxes stacked against the wall. How safe she'd felt, how confident she'd been that no matter what she said, no matter how many times she'd pulled back or cut me off or made me feel like basic care was an imposition, I'd still be there the next morning, still calling, still keeping the lights on, still making it easier for her to do it again the next time something got inconvenient. I thought about how long that had been the shape of us, how gradually it had become normal, how I'd kept filing things away without looking at them directly, because looking at them meant either having a real conversation or admitting I wasn't going to have one. So I'd done neither, just stayed, and let the pile get bigger and told myself that every relationship has friction and that the friction here was just part of the deal. That's a lie, by the way. Not all friction is normal. Some of it is just one person absorbing the cost of another person's choices over and over while calling it a compromise. I typed a response, deleted it, typed again, deleted that too. Finally sent one line. I meant what I said. Please. Stop contacting me. Her typing bubble appeared, held, disappeared, then nothing. For the first time since that Tuesday night, there were no calls, no knocks, no unknown numbers, no emails with the word trauma in them. Just quiet. And sitting in that quiet, what I felt wasn't sadness or triumph or anything I'd predicted. It was relief. The specific kind that comes when something you've been bracing against for a long time finally stops requiring your attention. Hang on. This is the narrator, not Cole. I just want to sit on that line for 1 second. She never thought I'd leave. That is the whole story. Not the text, not the lock change, not any of the calls. She had placed Cole in the permanent fixture category so long ago that she stopped registering his patience as a choice he was actively making. She thought it was just how he was built. The problem with counting on someone's patience like it has no end. They don't send a warning shot. They just stop. And when they do, it doesn't look like anger. It looks like silence. Final update coming. Final update. The quiet didn't hold forever. 2 days later, my building manager knocked. Not angry, just awkward. The kind of visit that comes with a prepared sentence. He said Nina had contacted him claiming she'd been unexpectedly locked out and needed access to retrieve essential belongings. He wanted to know if there was some kind of misunderstanding. I didn't raise my voice or give him more than he needed. Told him we'd broken up. The lease was in my name, and I was coordinating her belongings through a neutral third party. Then I showed him the text she'd sent telling me to stop calling her. He read it, nodded slowly, and said he'd make a note of it. That was the end of that conversation. That afternoon, a handwritten note got slid under my door. She said she never thought I'd abandon her, that she was hurt and confused, that all she'd wanted was reassurance, not consequences. She ended with, "I still believe we can fix this if you stop being stubborn." I read it once, sat with it, and then that last sentence clicked something into place that had been just slightly out of reach. She wasn't asking for repair. She was asking for reversal. She wanted the old version of me, the one who'd hear, "Stop calling me," and panic, then apologize for calling. The one who'd eventually open the door regardless of how he'd been treated because the discomfort of staying was still less than the fear of being done. The one who'd reset everything back to zero at the first sign of softness from her because being chosen, even conditionally, still felt better than being nothing. That version of me had kept this whole thing running for longer than it should have. He'd absorbed everything, filed everything away, convinced himself it was fine. He was gone now, and the note made it clear she hadn't gotten that memo yet. I folded the note and put it in a drawer. Then I finished boxing up everything she'd left behind. Every last item labeled clearly, neutrally, no commentary attached. Clothes, shoes, the random things she'd accumulated around the apartment that I'd stopped noticing were specifically hers. When I was done, I looked at the space she'd occupied and saw how much of it I'd never actually used. Entire drawers, a whole corner of the closet, half the bathroom counter, not because she demanded any of it formally. I just kept making room without being asked. And I'd kept making room until there wasn't much left that felt entirely mine. A few days later, I dropped everything off at a storage unit we'd arranged through Brooke. I didn't see Nina. That felt like something we'd both decided without needing to say it out loud. There was nothing left that needed to be said between us. The actions had already covered it. On the drive home, I went over that original text one more time. The way you replay something you've been trying to get completely clear on. "I'm not your property. Stop calling me." I spent weeks turning over whether I'd overreacted, whether a reasonable person would have just unlocked the door and talked it through. Turned the whole thing into a "we need to communicate better" conversation that eventually got filed away and forgotten. But here's what I finally got clear on. That text wasn't about independence. It wasn't about needing space or drawing some kind of healthy line. It was about control without accountability. She wanted the freedom to disappear on her own terms, while keeping the landing pad intact for when she decided to come back. She wanted to push someone away and still have them standing there when she turned around. She wanted to reject connection without losing access. And the structure she'd built worked exactly as long as I was willing to hold it up from the inside. The moment I stopped, no argument, no chase, no negotiating over what she meant versus what she said, it collapsed because it was never built on anything solid. It was built on my willingness to keep compensating, keep adjusting, keep making room. The thing about that structure is, it's invisible while it's working. You don't see yourself propping it up. You think you're just being a good partner, being patient, being reasonable. You're telling yourself that's just how relationships are. You work through the hard parts. You give people the benefit of the doubt. And all of that is true in a normal situation. But in this situation, what it actually meant was that I'd been doing the structural work for both of us and calling it love. The anger, the calls, the showing up with Brooke, the email, the handwritten note. None of it was really about losing me. It was about losing a version of me she'd stopped having to earn. And when she realized that version wasn't coming back, there wasn't much else to do. I don't hate her. I don't think she's some villain I need to build a case against. I think she got comfortable in a dynamic where she held all the exits, and I kept standing by the door, waiting to be let back in. I closed that door, not with anger, not with revenge, not with some final dramatic word, with 2 sentences and a lock change. For the first time in a long time, I'm not sitting around waiting for someone to decide I'm worth choosing. I already made that call. If you've ever been in one of those situations where someone wanted you to keep caring but stop having needs, I genuinely want to hear how you handled it. Not looking for validation, just want to know if this is as clear as it feels from here or if I'm still too close to see it straight. Look, I'm not about to tell you Cole's some kind of legend for doing what he did, but when someone sends you "I'm not your property" from an undisclosed location on a Tuesday night, you get one real choice: panic and beg or take them at their word. Cole took them at their word, and every call, every knock, every angle she ran afterward just confirmed he'd read it right from the start. Some people mistake patience for a permanent feature. They keep drawing on it until the account closes and genuinely can't understand what happened. Drop your take in the comments. What would you have done with that text? And if you're not subscribed, hit that button.